So hopefully the the PowerPoint is working on your screen. We're thankful that you've joined us tonight. I want to start a new series of lessons, and this may not go, 10 or 12 weeks in a row. This may go a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, and then I may break off and do something else, and then periodically come back to this. It's entitled Hidden Treasures of the Old Testament. What I would like to explain about that title briefly is, first of all, I don't like using excuse me, I don't like using the name Old Testament. I would rather use, in reference to the Old Testament, the term Hebrew Bible or Hebrew Scriptures. But due to the familiarity with the term Old Testament, with the people who might be watching this or the videos, I just opted out to go ahead and say, well, Old Testament. Well, what does hidden treasures mean? Well, what I mean by hidden treasures is not so much that they're hidden, they're there, and they can even be pretty obviously there. We just miss them. Sometimes we have a predetermined way to read the Bible, and we're looking for certain things, and there are things in the Bible that we're not looking for, and we just read right over them. We pass over them, we overlook them, and then yet, if we were to take the time to spend a little time searching out, well, what does this mean, and how does this how is this discussed in other places in the Bible, we might find a pattern. So a few years ago, when Paul Pierce was with us, if you'll remember Paul, he and I spent some time talking about design patterns in the Bible. And so a lot of these are design patterns, things that are there, but sometimes it has to be pointed out to you that they are there. So we're going to do that, and we're going to try to do that tonight with the teachings of the subject of the Sabbath. Hidden treasures in the Old Testament. I'd like for us, by the time our class is over tonight, to be aware that the Sabbath is important, because we can many people say, well, the Sabbath is what they used to do. They were the ones that were supposed to keep the Sabbath. We don't have to do that. We worship on Sunday. And so the laws of Sabbath are Old Testament laws. Well, yes, but let's see if they still may have some significance, and even a great deal of significance to us today. So what I would do then, first of all, is just start reading some of these scriptures. And there's a whole group of texts on your screen that we'll be looking at very quickly, each one of them. We're not going to spend we'll spend whatever time is necessary. But I'd like to begin with Genesis 2, verse 1, because that is where Sabbath is first mentioned in the Bible. It's right after chapter 1 of Genesis, which of course is the text on the creation of the world. So reading the last verse of chapter 1 of Genesis, and then into the first verse of chapter 2. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. As we remember from chapter 1, there were 6 days of creation. After every day, the writer of Genesis says, God saw that it was good. After, however, the 6th day and creation was completed, the author of Genesis says, God saw that everything was very good. Also, after every day, he used the same phrase. There was evening and there was morning. The first day, there was evening and morning, the second day, and all the way through till now, the 6th day. So then verse 1 of chapter 2 says, so the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host thereof. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. Now that's the seventh day, but note that that discussion does not end with the phrase, and he saw that it was good. We don't have that. Only the first 6 days, God said that. He saw that his creation was good. On the seventh day, he doesn't use that phrase, nor does the seventh day actually come to an end where he says, and after the end of the Sabbath day, there was evening and there was morning, a seventh day. He does not say that. That's not there. Only the 6 days of creation. The seventh day is recorded differently, and yet it is called the seventh day. So it is totally connected with the previous 6, but it's different. And in fact, if we read it carefully, we will see that God had stopped on the seventh day. God ceased his work of creation. And in reality, the word Sabbath, Shabbat in Hebrew, means to cease. And so what in chapter 2, verse 2, I'll reread that a little bit. On the seventh day, God finished his work, and he ceased from all his work that he had done on the seventh day. So the word Sabbath or rested, the word rested in most translations is the same word as Shabbat, and it means to cease or to stop. So on the seventh day, God stopped or ceased his work. And therefore, he celebrated all of his work of the previous 6 days. The Sabbath day was meant to be the day of completion, the day in which the earth, the heavens and the earth were completed, and all of the things that were created within the heavens and the earth, that would be the stars, the moon, the sun, the birds, the animals, the fish, and man. Now it's time for you to function. You've been created. Now it is time to function. And God sat back and in theory, or in trying to visualize, God's through. God's finished his job. God's finished the work of creation. And therefore, he stops and he looks at what he's done. And though he doesn't say to himself, it is good, what he does is he doesn't just take a day off, by the way, because you see, the next verse does not talk about the 8th day. There is no 8th day. There are 6 days of creation. There is a 7th day Sabbath of rest, and it ends there as far as the story is concerned. Actually, when we go on through Genesis 2, there's a second creation story that's given to us. So this text here in the beginning of the Bible, it seems a little like it's there, but we're not really sure what it means. And why does God need to rest? Because did he get tired? Does God need to stop because he's physically drained? No, I don't think any of us would assume that. So what does it mean that God ceased from his work or that he rested? If we look at it from the perspective of he ceased from his work rather than he took a day off, that is not what, I do not think that's anywhere close to what is being taught here, that God needed to take a day off. And then throughout the Bible, he's trying to tell all of us that we need to take a day off too, because we need to rest. Well, that may even be true. We are human. God is not. God did not need a day off. God is not lazy. nor did he have to start back because he'd already done everything. He's completed creation. So the word ceased comes into play here. God ceased his work. Rested means he ceased, he stopped. There is nothing else for him to do. And then he admires what he has done and allows it to start to function on its own. The world that he created is a functioning universe, and each part of the creation has its own place. And so God did not need to continue micromanaging his creation. He created it in such a way that it micromanages itself. I hope that makes sense. So that is placed there right after the 6 days of creation, but there's not much explanation. The only thing that we see there is in verse 3 that God blessed the seventh day. In some way, he placed a blessing on that day. And also in verse 3, it says that he made it holy. We'll look at that more in just a moment. Let's go to the next place in Scripture where Sabbath is mentioned, and it's in Exodus 16. And you might be surprised at that. It's not mentioned again. It was not mentioned in the time of Noah. It was not mentioned in the time of Adam. It was not mentioned in the time of Abraham or any of the patriarchs. Only when the children of Israel had already been delivered out of Egypt, and now they're in the wilderness, and they're hungry. And God is going to rain down bread from heaven, the manna in Exodus 16. And what he tells Moses to tell the people is this. They're complaining, we're hungry. We should have stayed in Egypt rather than come out here and die of hunger. And God says, oh, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to take care of you. Wake up in the morning and see what's on the ground. And they did that. And they went out and they gathered all the manna necessary for that day. Moses told them, now just only gather enough for the one day, because God's going to provide again tomorrow. You don't need any more than one day's worth. Some gathered too much. And when they did, they found out that at the end of the day, it started to rot and decay and smell. And they learned really quickly that they didn't need to gather. They didn't need to hoard, and they didn't need to overdo it. Except on the sixth day, you need to gather enough for 2 days, because on the seventh day, I'm not going to feed you. On the seventh day, there won't be any manna. Is that because God was not able to do it 7 days in a row? Well, of course, that's not the reason. You and I know very well that God could do anything he wanted to. If he had wanted to provide manna on the seventh day, he could have done so. There's a reason why he chose not to. And we'll look at that. So if you're in Exodus chapter 16, I'm in verse 9. Say to the whole congregation of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I've heard your grumbling. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am Yahweh, your God. The feeding of the multitudes in the wilderness had a purpose behind it, and that is to show the people of Israel who their God was, who is the one who delivered them, who is the one who loves them and cares for them. And that is what we're reading here. Then on verse 22, on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, this is what Yahweh has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept until morning. So they laid it aside till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Remember that phrase. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. The day was dedicated to the Lord, to Yahweh. Today is a Sabbath dedicated. I'm throwing the word dedicated in there. It's not there, but it's what it means. Dedicated to Yahweh. Today, you will not find it in the field. In other words, when you go out to look for it, it won't be there. You should have already collected enough for 2 days. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none. Well, some went out looking, and they didn't find any. So verse 29, he says, see, Yahweh has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain, each of you, in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh. So the people rested on the seventh day. The word is the same word, rested, that we found in Genesis chapter 2. There's a connection to what is going on here between what Yahweh has instructed his people to do regarding collecting food and what God did on the seventh day after he had created the world. The connection is not clear here. It's not all that clear. Why? He doesn't go into a lot of detail why they were supposed to do this, other than God said, do it. This is what you do. And you will, they found out that if they had gone out on the seventh day to collect the bread, it wasn't there. And they were rebuked for that. Keep those things in mind. Bear in mind, however, in verse 23, that this day is dedicated for a solemn rest. Again, it's the word to cease. So in other words, what were they to cease from doing? They were to cease from collecting manna on this day. Don't go out. You've already collected enough on the sixth day for the seventh. So cease. Don't collect any more food for the seventh day. And the other thought in that verse is, it is a holy Sabbath. It is holy. And it is a Sabbath dedicated to Yahweh. There's a dedication or a connection to their ceasing their labors and their relationship with their God. Bear in mind that this is not something that the other nations did. And when I'm sure they were told to do this, there was a lot of confusion, but also maybe some kickback, pushback. Well, why do we got to do this? Nobody else does this. It's not explained here, though. None of those things are explained. We have to continue reading. And I think the biblical writers are just pointing to us and saying, look, follow the thread, follow the pattern, just follow along and see, because each time it comes up, you learn something different. You learn something new. So we'll go to Exodus chapter 20. In Exodus chapter 20, we have God giving the children of Israel at Mount Sinai the Ten Commandments. So Exodus 20 is the Ten Commandments. In verse 8, one of the Ten Commandments is to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The key word there is to remember. There's something that you're supposed to remember. And there's also, again, this connection with holiness, which we haven't quite described what that means yet. 6 days, verse 9, you shall labor and do all your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath. Literally, on the seventh day is a cease day to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and ceased or rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now we're given some insight as to the reason. It should stick out as being very important that when God only gave 10 commandments, one of those is about the Sabbath day. One of the, he says, don't have any other gods before me. Don't make any images. Don't use the name of the Lord your God in vain. Don't commit adultery. Honor your parents. Don't steal. Don't kill. Don't commit adultery. Don't bear false witness. And remembering the Sabbath day is in the 10, which makes it among the top 10 commandments of the Bible. As far as Israel is concerned. But he does tell us a basis now why he's putting that day as a special day. And in verse 11, he tells us what it is. For Yahweh made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, you rest on the seventh day. He ceased from his work on the seventh day. Now you cease from your work on the seventh day. In other words, to connect to what God has done, to connect with God on his schedule, his schedule. In the Bible, we have several things going on. One is sacred space, which we've talked about before. And then there is also sacred time. And the seventh day is in the category of sacred time. God rested, now my people will rest too. Why? I created the world in 6 days, I rested. Now you rest. And the very first word of this text was to remember. Remember the Sabbath day. Remember what? Remember that I am the creator. Remember that everything all around you is here because of me. What you see, what exists, who you are, your life, everything about you exists because I made it. You take the time 1 day a week. You take the time off from all distractions, from all effort, and you remember what I've done. I believe the key in almost all of the Old Testament, if you really want to nail down a couple of design patterns in the Bible, one of them is that over and over God made created circumstances whereby Israel would remember him and not forget. Remembrance is important. And so the Passover is a feast once a year to remember being delivered from Egypt. All of the feasts have the purpose of reminding the people of God who God is and what he's done for them. Here is 1 day a week where you're supposed to do that. You are to be reminded once a week. Why? I don't want you to forget. God said, I don't want you to forget me. I don't want you to forget me. I wonder, even in our day, how many generations who don't hear about the teachings of the Bible, how many generations would it take before your family and my family forgot, had no recollection that there is a God? And in fact, I can tell you that right now, Israel, the Jewish community right now has forgotten. Well, I'll say many who are of the heritage and lineage of the Jewish family of Abraham have already forgotten. They don't read Torah. They don't study the Bible. They don't go to synagogue. Many do not. How long will it take before you forget? Well, I say one generation. And we forget. God is trying to guard against that. God is saying, I don't want you to forget. You've got to remember me throughout all generations. You've got to pass this on to your children and their children and their children and their children. This has to be passed on. And the way you're going to do that is by keeping these feasts, but also the way you're going to do that is by keeping my Sabbath every week. Once a week, you're going to stop. Once a week, you're going to cease from all your labor, and you're going to remember that I am the creator of this universe. And that's stated in the Ten Commandments. Well, the Ten Commandments, if you'll remember, Moses came down and he got angry with the people, and he threw the stones down and broke them, and he had to go back and he had to do it again. And so in Deuteronomy chapter 5, if you want to turn there, we have the Ten Commandments mentioned a second time. And they're the same 10. However, when we read about Sabbath in Deuteronomy 5, beginning at verse 12, you're going to see something different. Bear in mind that as we progress through the scriptures start to add additional information about Sabbath. It started out with God at the end of creation. And then it just begins to build and build and build as we work forward. So notice how it changes in Deuteronomy 5. Verse 12, observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as Yahweh your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor, do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath, or a day of ceasing from work, that you celebrate to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son, your daughters, your male servants, your female servants, your ox, donkey, or any of your livestock, or the sojourner who is in your gates, that your male servant and female servant may rest as well as you. That's almost exactly word for word. However, it starts to change here. You, verse 15, shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that Yahweh your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahweh your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. He doesn't bring up creation this time. In Exodus, the reason you keep the Sabbath is because you need to remember me as creator. But in Deuteronomy, he says, you need to remember me not as creator, you need to remember me as the one who has delivered you from Egypt. I saved you from the hand of Pharaoh. Now you keep the Sabbath and you remember what I have done for you in Egypt. I brought you out of slavery. This is a key component of Sabbath going forward. Notice that he said everyone should keep the Sabbath. You and your daughter and your slaves, your servants and slaves must keep Sabbath. In other words, for one day, they've been set free. They don't serve you on that day. They also get to participate in a cessation of work, a rest. For one day a week, they're free. But the reason that you do this is because all of you have been set free from the bondage that you lived in, the slavery that you endured while you were in Egypt. That's an extremely important component of Sabbath, and that is freedom of the slaves, freedom of the captives. we're building here. The writers of Scripture are building a case. And this, it was, remember me as creator, but now he's saying on the Sabbath day, this is something else, a new component that you should remember. And that is what I did for you in Egypt when I set you free from slavery. Keep that in mind. We'll go back to Exodus. Exodus 31. Verse 12. Yahweh said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. I don't know how your translation reads there, but what it is saying is that above all the things that I've asked you to do, above all the commandments, above the things that that I'm asking you to do, I'm telling you the most important one is to keep the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath above all. For this is a sign, my translation says, this is a sign. Keeping the Sabbath is a sign of something. It's between me and you throughout all of your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, have sanctified you. That you may know that I, the Lord, has sanctified you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. That's pretty serious. If you don't keep the Sabbath, you're going to be killed. You're going to die. You're going to be judged on the spot. Whoever does any work, that soul shall be cut off from among the people. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall be put to death. Therefore, the people of Israel shall keep Sabbath, observing Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. It is a sign. That's the second time it says that. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. This is the way my translation reads there. Again, there is a connection with the Sabbath day and God's resting after he created the heavens and the earth. It ties the two together. There's an importance there. The Sabbath day is holy, it says, unto the Lord. That day is the day of dedication to a time of intimacy and relationship with the one who created the entire universe. In the Deuteronomy passage, it is a time of intimacy with the one who delivered you out of bondage in Egypt. It is a holy day. And the word holy now in the Old Testament and in the New Testament does not mean overly righteous or pure or a good person. The word holiness, the opposite of the word holy is the word common. So you are either, something is either of common use, like the other 6 days. The other 6 days, you just use them in a common fashion, however, whatever. But the seventh day is unique. It is holy. It is separated. It is set apart from the other 6 days. It is different. You have 7 days in a week. 6 are the same. 1 is set apart from the others. It is set apart and made holy because of the time that is to be spent with Yahweh and not in work. It is a sign. A sign to who? Well, it's a sign to them, but it's also a sign to the nations that these people keep the Sabbath as a special day, whereas no one else in the world does that. This group of people does it. Why? Because it is a teaching tool. The Sabbath was meant to teach. It was given and meant to be a teaching tool for Israel, but it was also meant to be a teaching tool for all the nations of the world. These are my people. I am their God. We have a special relationship. And as a result of that, they keep a special day that's totally dedicated to me and to me alone. For I am the creator of this universe, and I set them free and delivered them from slavery. Our time is quickly passing. I'm going to have to try to get through some of this, and I probably won't get through the lesson tonight, unless you want to stay for 2 hours, which you probably don't. So we won't. But let's look at Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23. Well, that's not it's in there. Leviticus 23, verse 3. The chapter begins by saying, let me identify for you the appointed feasts that Yahweh has proclaimed. And the first one mentioned is the Sabbath day, is a solemn rest. It's not one of the feasts. It's interesting that the feasts are Passover, Feast of Tabernacles, and all that is given after this, but the first one mentioned in the chapter is to keep the Sabbath day. Let's go to Leviticus 25. And I don't want to read all of this. In Leviticus 25, the writer moves into not the Sabbath day, but into a concept known as the Sabbath year. And then in verse 8, it moves into the teaching on what is known as the year of Jubilee. Both of these are things that I would like to spend more time on than we have tonight. But the point I would like to make tonight is that not only did God require 1 day a week, he required 1 whole year every 7 years to let the land rest. So they would sow their crops, they would work the land for 6 years, and in the 7th year, they would do nothing. And they would, and yet it says that God would provide for them, even though they didn't sow a crop, they didn't harvest a crop, they still had plenty of food. This goes back to the manna on the 6th day. You don't need to collect any food on the 7th day because you had enough on the 6th day left over. In other words, Sabbath means that God is going to provide. It's another sign that God takes care of his people. It is not your work. It is not your effort. It is not you going out and working that allows you to survive. It is God's grace, and it is God's mercy, and it is God's provision. And how do we know that? Because it goes all the way back to creation. Because when he created the world, he created an abundance. His creation was sufficient and abundant, and there was no shortage. When he created the Garden of Eden, there was no shortage of food. There was no problem that the people would ever have to worry about famine or pestilence or weather-related issues that would dry up the source of food. It was not going to happen. When God created the universe, he provided sufficiently for all human needs. It was man who sinned and man who created the issue that was wrong. But every Sabbath day was a reminder, I'll take care of you. God is saying, I'll take care of you. There's enough. You don't have to work today. I will provide for you. I will provide manna on the 6th day for 2 days. Every 7th year, I will provide enough food for you in that year that you don't have to work the whole year. And by the way, every 50 years, I'll do the same thing. Every 50 years in the year of Jubilee, and if you don't see what I'm driving at there, so go to Leviticus 25, verse 21. I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. Do you see that? He's saying you don't have to work, because in the 6th year, your crops are going to produce enough for you to live off of for 3 years. So you'll be able to not have to work in the 7th year, and then in the 50th year of Jubilee, you won't have to work that year either, because in the 6th year I provided enough food for you. This is a treasure that is hidden. People don't. We read the Bible and we miss stuff. And God is saying to his people, you don't need to work. I'll take care of you. I will provide for you. And there's so much more here in the year of Jubilee. And I will teach on that at another date, not tonight. I just wanted us to see the connection between the 7th year and the Sabbath. There's a Sabbath day, there's a Sabbath year. And then after 7 Sabbath years, 49 years, the next year is a year of Jubilee, which is a year of the freedom of all the slaves and freedom of all debts. And the land goes back to its original owners. And if you have indentured yourself in slavery, you'll be set free. Do you see? Every 50 years is a resetting of Egypt, setting the slaves free. It's an amazing story. It is absolutely amazing. I want to look at one more scripture, and then we'll have to stop for tonight. And I won't get to the application, so we'll have to wait 2 weeks to get to the application of all of this. But if you'll look with me in Leviticus 26, and then we'll end tonight. Verse 1. You shall not make idols for yourselves, or erect an image or pillar. You shall not set up a figured stone in your land to bow down to it, for I am Yahweh your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. So what he says in the first 2 verses, I want you to do, don't worship idols. Don't make any idols. Keep my Sabbaths and reverence my temple, my tabernacle. Verse 3, if you'll do this, if you walk in my statutes, then verse 4, then I will give you rain. Verse 6, I will give you peace. Verse 9, I will turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and will confirm my covenant with you. Verse 11, I will make my dwelling with you. Verse 12, I will walk with you. Verse 13, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So if you will keep my statutes, these are the blessings. And so it says in scripture, he blessed the 7th day. God blessed the Sabbath day. How did he bless it? You keep it, and I'm going to bless you. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make your crops grow. I'm going to send sufficient rain in season. I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to remove the harmful beast. I'm going to make you fruitful and multiply. Everything is going to go well with you. There will be an abundance for you to live off of if you'll just obey me. Verse 14. But if you don't listen, verse 16, I will visit you with panic. Verse 17, I will set my face against you, and you will be struck down before your enemies. Verse 18, I will discipline you 7-fold for your sins. Verse 19, I will break the pride of your power. Verse 21, if you walk contrary to me and will not listen to me, I will continue striking you 7-fold for your sins. I will let loose the wild beasts against you. Verse 24, I will walk contrary to you, and I myself will strike you sevenfold. Verse 25, I will bring a sword upon you that will execute vengeance for the covenant. I will send pestilence among you. 28, I will walk contrary to you in fury, and I myself will discipline you sevenfold for your sins. Verse 30, I will destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars and cast your dead bodies upon the dead bodies of your idols. 31, I will lay your cities waste and will make your sanctuaries desolate. I will not smell your pleasing aromas. 32, I myself will devastate the land so that your enemies who settle in it shall be appalled. 33, I will scatter you among the nations. I will unsheath the sword after you. 34, then the land will enjoy its Sabbath as long as it lies desolate. While you are in your enemy's land, then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. And it goes on and on. I would highly recommend. A lot of folks say, the book of Leviticus is very boring. I would spend some time in chapter 26 this week. Just read the whole chapter in its context as I just tried to read it for you. It is a powerful text. And basically it says, if you don't worship idols and if you keep my Sabbaths, I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to make your life peaceful and happy and productive and abundant. But if you don't, then disease will come upon you, and pestilence will come upon you, and powers of other nations will come upon you. They will take you into exile. And this is exactly what happened to Israel several hundred years later. This is exactly what happened to them. But notice how it ties in. While you're in exile, guess what's happening to the land? While you're in exile, you've been removed from the country. What's going on with the land? It's resting. It's getting the rest. In other words, God is saying, I will see to it that my land gets rest. I will see to it that the land Sabbath will occur. If I have to send you into bondage somewhere else, my land will rest. I am God. I am Yahweh. I am your God. So, what does all this mean? Well, I've got a whole nother lesson to answer that question. I'll wrap this up, and then we'll have to review it again in a couple of weeks as we try to move forward with this. Time-wise, we just don't have that time tonight. We moved from what appeared to be God ceasing from his work of creation and noticing and admiring the work that he had done for 6 days. And he ceased from his labor. He ceased from his effort. There was nothing else for him to do. There was no, in 6 days, he created everything. He didn't have to do anything else after that. And he rested. And then he called a people out of Egypt. He took them into the wilderness. And when they were hungry, they were slaves. And when they came out of Egypt, they didn't bring enough food with them. And yet God provided. And he said, but I want you to trust me. Trust me. You don't need to worry about the seventh day. I'll take care of you. Will you trust me? Looking forward, every 7 years, you don't have to plant your crops in the 7th year. I will take care of you. Will you trust me? Every 50th year, you're going to let the land go back to its original owner. Every 50th year, you're going to free all the slaves. Every 50th year, you're going to forgive all debts. Will you trust me? And you're not going to work. So you're not going to work the 49th year because that's a Sabbath year. And you're not going to work on the 50th year because that's the year of Jubilee. Will you trust me that the 6th year prior will feed you for 3 years? That there will be an abundance? Will you trust me? I hope you see the thread here of God providing and his people simply trusting and believing and living in faith that their God will take care of them. Now, that's the underlying meaning of Sabbath. It is a dedicated day, year of trust, of relationship, of reflection, of worship. You don't need to work. All of the time and effort that you put into work, you can rest, but it's not about being idle. It's not about being idle or lazy or do nothing. Sabbath is about ceasing from common activities and making that time holy unto the Lord, separating time into a holy day, a day of remembrance, a day of worship, a day of relationship with the God who created and the God who delivered. I think I'll stop there. Let you reflect on that for a week, 2 weeks, I guess, and in a couple of weeks we'll come back and we'll pick up there and try to draw some additional conclusions. Thank you for being on the call tonight, and I'll end it there and open the door for your comments or questions.